Hi, everyone. Welcome to Smart City Institute of Japan's webinar series called Global Perspective on Smart Cities. I'm your host, Tak Nagumo, Executive Director of the Smart City Institute of Japan. And today we have a distinct speaker from the World Bank, and I will introduce them to you momentarily. But before that, I have a just small housekeeping message for you. So we would like to invite any comments or questions from audiences through the chat box. And when you choose, when you write the questions to the speaker, please choose all panelists and participants from the pull-down menu of the chat box. Okay. All right. Let's invite our distinct speaker. Today's speaker is Mr. Victor Mulas, Senior Urban Specialist and TDLC Team Lead, Tokyo Development Learning Center at World Bank. So, Victor, welcome.
Thank you, Tak. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have you on this topic. Yeah, so we've been running this webinar for a year and so forth, and basically we have been focusing domestic issues, and now you are on board to share with your global perspective. And then no one other than you can talk about this global perspective since you are the one specialized in this area at the World Bank, right? And today your topic is the building back better after COVID-19 toward greener, resilient, and competitive cities, which sounded very interesting.
Thank you, Tak. It sounds also very well-run title, so I will try to make it more friendly as we go through the presentation.
Yeah. So this is Friday, so let's relax and enjoy this time. Okay. So
right.
Victor, your time, your show time.
Okay, thank you. Let me share the screen to have the presentation. And as promised, I was trying to make it a little bit easier title. So we call it Reinventing Cities, which at the end is how are we going to think about cities in a different way. So let me start with the formal announcements that we have to do at the World Bank, just to remind everyone that the contents of the slides and the presentation are compiled only for discussion purposes and do not represent the position of the World Bank Group. This is my personal views and the information that we compile here. Most of it is forward thinking in nature. So it may change, it may be updated, it may have modifications. This is more to have a conversation, and it's informal in itself. Let me start just by saying a little bit about who we are. So basically, we are part of the World Bank. And the World Bank is a institution that is the largest developing bank in the world. We serve 145 countries that are the members of the institution, and we have around $77 billion in loans, grants, equity, and guarantees that we have on average per year, just to give you a sense. So as part of the World Bank, I am here as the team lead of the Tokyo Development Learning Center. And the Tokyo Development Learning Center is a partnership that the World Bank has with the government of Japan. Basically, we specialize in knowledge. We are a knowledge hub. And we try to bring the expertise of the Japanese expertise, but also global expertise and best practices that we find around the world. And we try to put it together and in a way that can serve the different projects around the world that the World Bank is having to support all the countries that we work with, but also any other urban practitioner across the world. Just for the audience to get a sense, I mean, can go to the website, but this is basically the program that we work with. We basically have a knowledge acceleration program, which is a cohort-based knowledge program we do with 10 to 15 projects that are active in design in the world about an urban topic particularly. And after that, we provide additional operational support with the expertise that they learn and they want to apply in their countries from Japan primarily. And we will just do a follow-up for 6 months with them. We produce publications and research based on these best practices. And we also work with a series of partners. We work with several cities, as you're going to see in the next slide, but also with institutions like Smart City Institute, and we're very, very happy to collaborate with you, and many others in Japan that have excellent knowledge and practices. And we do this in every topic related to urban, with technologies, disruptive technologies being a cross-cutting topic, because we are seeing it more and more applied for everything, for green development, for urban transportation, for solid waste management, for anything related to urban, and of course for smart cities. And just finally about the program, we have strong partnerships with several Japanese cities. We are very happy working with them, particularly with 6, Yokohama, Toyama, Kyoto, Kitakyushu, Fukuoka, and Kobe. We also work very closely with Tokyo and Osaka, and of course any other city that has a practice or experience that is relevant, and we can work together with across Japan. We also have partnerships with global cities, cities like Barcelona, like Helsinki, like New York or Amsterdam, and we work together with this kind of universe. From TDLC, we are bringing the closer relationship with Japanese cities, but we connect to this global network of cities that we work together in the World Bank. So that was the introduction, just to give a sense to the audience what is TDLC, the program that I'm leading here in Japan, and where all these ideas are coming from is from all this knowledge that we work with during the year, and the experience that we see across the world, and then we collect plus the different partnerships that we are doing. So this year has been a very challenging year for cities, right? And with the pandemic, we have seen that the impact, the effect has been seen worldwide, everywhere. But I think cities has been especially one of the areas where we have seen the effect more clearly. And what I wanted to do in this presentation a little bit, and this comes after the discussion we have brainstorming about what we could talk about, is I wanted to start by discussing some things that we have learned from the pandemic, from the perspective of cities, some things that we are learning, and that are becoming clear for us, and particularly from my perspective. Yeah? And after that, I want to start discussing or presenting some of the ideas that are starting to emerge across the world in different cities about how to reinvent cities after we have what we have seen in the pandemic. Because after suffering the lockdowns and after suffering being at home and wanted to have more open space, or wanted to have more social connections or more livable spaces, there is a lot of thoughts and ideas that have been prompted by this crisis or this situation. And of course, I think it's a mix of we being at home and having a lot of time to think, plus the sense of crisis, and together all this, the explosion of ideas are coming, and it's super interesting. And I wanted to start discussing that with you. And finally, to add some reflections about what all of these may be telling us about how cities are going to evolve as we move forward. So I will start with some of the insights, or some of the ideas that at least I am seeing from COVID-19 and the evolution of it in the urban environment in cities. So the first one is, despite what we have seen at the beginning of the pandemic, that people started to go and say, oh no, I'm going to go to the suburban area. I want to live in a place that I'm with nature, and because I can telecommute now. People still want to come back to cities. People still look at agglomeration from two sides: from the social side of living, for the livability, but also from the economic side. So agglomeration is far from that. To the contrary, it's increasing, and we are seeing it becoming stronger out of this. And it's natural in terms of social interaction. That's what humans crave at the end. But we have seen it even more strength with digitalization. It hasn't gone it's not opposing force, it's an augmentation force at the end. That's what we are starting to see. The second thing that I've been starting to see is there is an acceleration in the shift towards the intangible economy. We were already going in that direction, but that has accelerated tremendously, exponentially with the pandemic. The change into digital means and intangible means, it's accelerating, powered by technologies, of course, but we are seeing a huge change into modes and business models, but also social models that are complementary to intangible to the intangible economy primarily. And the third thing, I think it's a huge new appreciation of and growing appetite for green spaces and livability, and a big conscious about going into green policies in general, but to have it close to you, to live it together, right? And getting your city to be more livable and more connected to nature, to have mindful spaces, this third space that is seen, that is not work and it's not living, it's a third space that you can find to rest or to think or to be in a different way. So those three things for me have been very clear that are happening. There are many others, but those are three that I'm seeing very strongly happening. I'm gonna now start talking about the ideas that I'm also seeing from multiple cities and regarding how cities can evolve or reinvent themselves into addressing the challenges that they face. So I try to package them in different topics, and this is for discussion in general. I mean, it can be packaged in a different way, but I wanted just to start discussing some of them. So the first one is, we're seeing this move more into greener and more livable cities. And these ideas have come like the 15-minute cities in Paris or the super blocks in Barcelona that was already there. Call it as you want. At the end is making the neighborhoods more walkable, more human scale, taking maybe the cars out to main roads and making the human space, the livable space, more active, more human traffic, and activated, having all you need to live and make the social life in a walking distance. And that concept change. Sometimes it's walking distance, in other cities is bicycle distance, but at the end is something that is not car distance, right? And it's about going back to the idea of the village, right? Having the whole small village. Your neighborhood is like a small village. It has everything you need. And it's something that in Japan, I mean, it was already there with around the stations. It's a concept that you had with compact cities, but at the end, this is similar, but adding the human scale in the sense that taking a little bit the cars out, the noise out, and allowing more of this human scale and human interaction, vitalizing the areas, right? So reducing traffic and reducing cars, it's associated with that because it also goes with improving the air quality. And that's, I think, something we have seen from the pandemic, how some cities change completely the landscape, and suddenly in cities like Delhi or Beijing, you started to see, oh, the sky is blue. it wasn't gray. And I think that was very visual for many of the residents, right? So that's one of the things we are seeing, like spreading across cities, no matter which one going into thinking this way. The other one that is associated with that is regreening cities, right? But regreening cities with nature-based solutions, and it's bringing this element of the connection with the nature on the cities. It's very interesting here that we are starting to see things like talking about soundscaping and looking for spaces that are more mindfulness within the city. So it's not only having a green space nearby where you live. Tokyo does that very well. You have design a city that you have a green space within 15 minutes, usually distance of neighborhoods. That's part of the plan of Tokyo, but not all the cities have that, right? So if you go, for instance, to a city like Dhaka, that would be more difficult to see. Or you go to a city like New York or Madrid, they have very big parks, but not small parks, right? So they have to move into getting there. So that idea of having small green areas nearby, I think, is coming, bringing more nature into the streets and bringing more the trees and the vegetation to the streets, but also bringing the mindfulness, right? The space where not only you have the green space, but you can feel relaxed and hear nature only, or be in an environment that is relaxed and you don't have the traffic and things like that. So that's what soundscaping is about, and you're starting to hear about this new way of associating that with cities and urbanscaping. I think the other part is using the nature also to mitigate heat island effects, or to make the cities cooler and cleaner. And here, I think there is a lot of thinking about how do you use, you want to put more trees or more greeneries, but at the same time that consumes more water. And then you get into the conundrum that you are creating a problem by getting a solution. So I think what we are starting to see here is leveraging the natural characteristics of nature in your city to bring this in a natural way. So it flows directly with nature, instead of just introducing it artificially. So things that we have seen, London is trying to bring back the vegetation in the way that it was before, with the water currents as they were. So it stabilizes them. Here in Tokyo, for instance, one of the plans was to leverage the current of the bay to bring the cooler the cooler of the city with the breeze, and taking out the big high scrapers out of the way. So it will come together with a line of different parks. So it will bring naturally the cooling effect. So we are starting to see more of those things, and the same, for instance, with flash flooding. How do you leverage vegetation for naturally limiting the flash flooding from happening? And we are starting to see how cities think more about creating the city back with the nature instead of against the nature, right? And a micro level, but also more of a macro level. The third one, it's about this acceleration on the intangible economy. That is really, really impacting cities. During the pandemic, we have seen a huge increase in internet usage. For instance, in this region, during the last year, we have 14 million new users. Just to give you a sense, between 2015 and 2019, the year before the last year, we have 100 million internet users for 4 years, right? This year, 40 million. So you can have the scale of what's started to happen this year. And I think in Japan has been also very telling. Japan was like kind of reluctant to get into digital in many ways. And now it has made a huge step towards that, right? But interestingly enough, what we are seeing is that the business models are changing in a way that may not come back, right? So, for instance, digital payments are starting to advance in a way that would be difficult to come back. Traditional brick and mortar business are becoming digital. We have seen a huge change in retail, for instance, with the pandemic. Very difficult to be completely back. When you go into, for instance, food, many restaurants are starting to learn to do ghost kitchens, or to start getting the delivery. How is this going to come back? Probably in a hybrid way. And we have seen also different, many different changes in the way retail works, also using these new intangible economy models. So the point here is, we are not going to go back to the normal. We're going to be in a different way of doing business. We will have some of them that will be completely brick and mortar, but more of them will be hybrid, and new business models will come and just evolve out of this. And that has implications for jobs. It has implications for economic growth of the cities and competitiveness. And that is the reason we are highlighting this one here, because the intangible economy requires a different kind of talent to develop this new business and to maintain it. The third one is about mobility, and that's something that was already ongoing during the pandemic. It just has accelerated, and what we're seeing is a cities in general trying to leverage this even going forward. How to change the reliance on cars only, right? Because cars tend to be very inefficient. They are parked about 95% of the time, and they take a lot of public space or private space. On top of that, they represent 75% of the emissions in the transport sector. So it's something that can be made much more efficient, right? So I think mobility as a service is something that we started to see with Uber when it entered, but it has accelerated during the pandemic, and it has gone beyond cars, right? It's also bicycles, it's also other types of transportation like the scooters that we see in other cities. But the point is, this will continue and expand, and most likely new business model related to that will come. We will probably go into different and more efficient transportation structures with multimodality. I expect to see much more multimodality associated. The move into the 15-minute city probably will expand bicycles more and these other transportation modes like the scooters. I think that is not so relevant for you here in Japan, because you already have that multimodality well established, and you see the use of bicycles. I mean, for me, it's incredible here how well are they used, and they share the streets in a very orderly way, despite not having the specific rules for it. So it's working. But in many other cities, this is something that we probably expand. And what we probably see then is more efficiency in the use of public transportation beyond trains. One of the issues that we will see later with infrastructure is probably how do you move out of highways within the city, just to put them outside the city and regain part of the city life. And this is relevant for a city like Tokyo, where you have 1 or 2 or even 3 motorways on top of each other in some cities. So that creates a kind of a border effect in that city, and you lose part of that to the walking traffic and livability. The other one that we are starting to see, and this, even though it sounds as fiction, it is not so much. It's about air as the new part of the transport infrastructure. And what we started to see is more likely it will be for some cargo for delivery, but it may start having some public transportation in terms of taxis. And we are seeing that with the drones and the new solutions on taxis, sky taxis that are evolving. But one of the things we're starting to see is more and more cities and transport authorities to start thinking how to regulate the different, how to regulate the air for transportation, how to start thinking what are the transportation corridors that we can set, and how do we start regulating them and signaling them. And that's something that we're gonna talk later, because that's part of the intangible infrastructure that you have as a city. And that is all about sensors and about AI. So it's all intangible. It's like all in the intangible realm, but it's something that some cities are starting to prepare for, and I expect that to also grow. The other thing is more about distributed networks and how this will be applied to utilities services, particular things like electricity, because when you start combining like self-generation with blockchains and distributed kind of networks about it, you will probably start having the possibility of changing the way the utilities are served. and being able to combine that with low carbon incentives to accelerate the change into renewable energy. That can go into more utilities. So the interesting thing we are seeing here is the model of utilities that we have in cities for some basic services, like network services that we talk about, like internet, like water, like energy, etc., can start to change in the way they are delivered and the way they are managed, and be more micro-developing neighborhoods or being or having different sustainability models that we have right now. The third one is about flexible adaptive reuse, and that we are seeing everywhere. I think this is something that was very clear with the pandemic. How do you use infrastructure that exists already, but we cannot change? Like the streets, we cannot change it. They are there, and they are probably very resilient. It's very solid infrastructure, right? But we can adapt it with new needs, and we can reuse it. So the key here is start using in a flexible way the infrastructure the cities have. And maybe you can use it depending on the time. The street can have different functions. Depending on the day, we are starting to see that streets become just pedestrian or just for restaurants, and they open, or completely. You just transform them completely and you change it into something else. That's something New York has started to do, gaining some of the streets just for creating cafes outdoors and things like that. So that's something that cities are starting to do more and more during the pandemic completely. And it's something that we expect to see more. And would be the interesting thing is how to start changing that at a neighborhood level, together with the different neighborhoods in a co-creation way with the businesses and the residents. So you can adapt the infrastructure you have to the different needs and of the different neighborhoods and the different needs of the citizens themselves. This is especially interesting now because we are seeing this transition into more dynamics and these new intangible business models that are starting to change the way we thought about many of the services we have, including mobility, right? So cities also are starting to be more flexible about that and do more experimentation. And that's where you add some boxes, or you are like flexible use just at some times to start seeing how it works. And they work both with businesses and communities to do this experimentation on reusing some of the spaces. The adaptive reuse also applies to private space, because we are starting to see different models also, for instance, of working, and the office is changing. And this thing that I mentioned about the third space, which is not your office, not your home, but a lounge maybe, or a cafe where you are comfortable with, where you don't have the pressure of each one of them. So that's also how offices are starting to adapt themselves. I know that here in Japan, many of the office developers are starting to think, how will be the new office and how do I have to change it? And probably the same with residents. We already had the concept of co-working. Now we go into co-living, and how then you start mixing all of them together. Should it be residential? Should it be office? Should it be in the middle of all that? And how do we work around that? So those are things that we're starting to see a lot, with a lot of different business models around that. And another one I wanted to talk a bit is this concept of cities of human scale. Because we talk about the 15-minute city, the super blocks, and how to bring everything to the walking or biking area. But I think we wanted to summarize this with this picture, because for me, the city that is more human and human scale is Venice, in the sense that it was designed before there were cars, and except for the canals, all the streets are walking streets, because there were no cars when they designed it, and they cannot change it because it was already done, right? So you really feel there that everything is designed for human scale. And I compare the feeling I had there, that was very warm and in some way, to the feeling in the US when I lived there with all the highways, right? And the suburban life. And the difference is the vitalization part. Of course, Venice has many problems now in terms of becoming an attraction park for tourism and so on. But I'm talking more about the sensation of making things at human scale. And we can discuss that later, because I think in Japan, you mix both of them, or you are starting to mix both of them, at least in Tokyo, in a way that attracts vitalization to areas that may not have a human scale per se. For instance, business area, like in Marunouchi area. There is a street design with human scale in nature, where you have all the cafes and all the shops. And if you think about that, the street is very narrow, enough for you to walk across. They can cut the traffic and during the weekends. So it becomes very, very livable, and it has a lot of people. It's very full of people walking around. You wouldn't see that in a downtown in the US. You don't have that kind of human scale streets. They are big streets with 4 or 5 lanes, impossible to cross. And so that's a little bit what this is going into. And I think the other part is we already have seen many co-creation and participatory solutions. But what we're starting to see now, the cities is going back that at the neighborhood level and trying to bring that whole concept of the fora, which was the cities were so small at the beginning that the citizens will participate all the time in the decisions. We kind of lost that as we grew as cities, and now it's coming back with these digital tools that we have to co-create the participatory solutions. But the interesting thing is when you start bringing blockchains, as I said before, because then you can start seeing the neighborhoods or the citizens themselves starting to be also service delivery themselves. They can do some of the service themselves or organizing themselves. And we saw that in different countries that they will not only provide ideas, they will also say, we will take over this. And that could be from the private sector to individuals themselves organizing themselves. So that is leading into starting to think about the city more than the city as a service provider that provides services to the citizens, and thinking more about the city as a conductor of an orchestra, conductor of all these stakeholders. And that has severe implications in how the city operates, but also the talent within the city. The workers of the city need to think about how to work with the city, right? This is very different between providing the services or enabling those services and helping them get the solution. So these were some of the ideas that I wanted just to bring for the discussions. And at the end, some of the reflections that I wanted to conclude with. And they are not, they are just summarizing what we have seen, but basically out of these, what I'm taking is these trends are starting to reinforce each other. So it's most likely that they go very strongly. We are going into more livability and green spaces, more high quality of life, but more high quality of life in cities also attracts more people, which are usually the more talented people, which at the end are the ones that are going to develop the new business model for intangible economy. So it's a cycle, and you will see some cities going very fast on this, and the ones that start late will have it very difficult to catch up. That's probably what we'll go into. We'll see much more of this greener, livable, and mindfulness environment in cities. There will be pockets, and they will start evolving and growing. We will go more into human scale around neighborhoods, more likely. And the reuse and transformation of physical infrastructure will continue. But I also expect to see a lot of magnification with intangible, with the intangible world. And what I'm saying about that is a little bit what I talk about the air with the being signaled with sensorizations and AI controlling the corridors. But you started to see that also with physical infrastructure that can be leveraged with lights, or can be leveraged with different, now we have LED panels, but it will become a lot of bit like different materials that can change the sense of the limitations of the physical will start to become more used depending on the materials you use to expand their use and be more flexibly used. So the limitations we have in physical, I expect them to be less limited for these flexible uses that we were talking before. It's a little bit what we saw with the advertising. In the advertising at the beginning, we only have this printed advertising when I was growing up, and they needed to change it. And then we have this other one that will automatically change inside, and it was printed. Now then we went into the digital one, and it was an image, and it's changing. What is going to be next? Could it be just the virtual one? You don't even have a display. It could just appear because you can see with an hologram. I don't know. But the question is, how do you change the characteristics of physical materials so it can allow you to use more physical infrastructure in more flexible ways? I'm talking about the street, for instance, or the buildings themselves, right? About intangible infrastructure, it will grow, particularly with sensorization, and then we'll see more sandboxing and experimentation with cities, and more distributed decision-making and service delivery, more likely. And that's it. That's all what the presentation was about. And Doug, now I pass it to you for the discussion.
All right, Victor, thank you very much. It was full of new ideas, interesting. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. For the audiences, now we are open for any questions or comments through the chat box. So please feel free to write something you want. Right. And in the meantime, I would like to open the discussion with Victor. And again, full of good point actually. And one which caught my eyes was your catch on agglomeration is far from dead. You know what? What we have been talking in Japan is that, okay, population density in Tokyo is the incubator for the infection. So let's decentralize. That was a policy idea which haven't been implemented. Just started to think of this way. We put everything into Tokyo, centralize everything. First of all in Tokyo, the economy, business, politics, education, whatnot. Maybe followed by other big cities like Osaka, Nagoya, Fukuoka, and so forth, right? But all of a sudden, the COVID-19 emerged, and look at today. It's under the state of emergency again,
yes.
four times, right?
Yeah.
So with the digital technology readily available right now, we can work from the distance, and while living in the suburban areas, you can enjoy the more spacious residence area and more local foods. And you can still work at home. Don't need to commute in a packed train for 1 hour and a half and 2 hours, right? So everyone was fascinated about the idea of, okay, you don't need to commute at all. You can work from home. Now it's time for decentralization. And if you look at the statistics, people are not necessarily moving away from Tokyo, actually relocating half an hour by train from where you were. So a bit of decentralization, but more of it just how do you say, relocating to a little bit away from the center of Tokyo. You're still maintaining same job, same school, same connections, and so forth. So it's kind of the reality is people need the connection. People need the established network. And I was kind of reconfirmed that this was happening not only in Tokyo, but everywhere on Earth. Is that right?
Yeah, that is exactly what you're saying, right? So yes, you can move a little bit in a more suburban, you want to get the green space, but you stay in the metropolitan area, right? You stay at the 30 minutes radio, so you know that it can come back. The other trend that we've seen is many people left during the pandemic, and as soon as the cities reopened, they came back, right? You saw that in New York a lot. I mean, it was like, yeah, New York is going to be dead, downtown is going to be dead, everybody wants to go out. And as soon as they opened, boom, everybody went back. And and it's what we're talking about is the economic drive, that's number one, because at the end, jobs stay there or ideas generate there. But the other is the social life. Yeah. So at the end, that's what attracts. And it's true that, it's agglomeration in the sense of metropolitan area, right? So that's where it goes, and it has different levels of agglomeration. There's a minimum level of agglomeration that we know then it doesn't generate enough critical mass, and then there are the middle ones, secondary cities, if you want, and then there is a limit of maximum agglomeration because then you start having these economies of scale, right? So there is a game there, but the point is cities will continue growing, and they will continue attracting the talent.
Yeah, maybe 2 months ago when I was asked to make a presentation, right, on the topic of the smart cities today in Japan, I was urging, okay, we are now decentralizing. Okay, everyone, listen to me. But the reality is that, after some delay, the statistics came up, and looking at the numbers, that people are not moving away. Even if, the Tokyo residents are moving away from Tokyo itself, they're relocating to Kanagawa Prefecture and Saitama Prefecture, Chiba Prefecture, just surrounding it. So in Tokyo area, in the greater area, it's still growing. Population is still growing.
Yeah, and we saw other thing that for me was interesting is the New York, Miami, right? So one of the things of the transformation of New York in the last 20 years, how was how after New York transformed itself into an entrepreneurship hub of startups and technology. It wasn't that, and that happened in the last 10 years. Before that, it was a financial hub, right? So we needed and some media, and then of course the retail and other things. But startups, they didn't have technology. In fact, they didn't have any single university with engineers. And in the last 10 years, it became one of the largest hubs of startups in the US. It was second to Boston, and then it became the second one after Silicon Valley, right? So it was there. And during this pandemic, people fled the city because New York was hit very hardly, and it was like very, very difficult. And many went to Miami because the connection with Miami, especially the funding started going there, all the VCs, and then of course the founders that had like a startup that was already big enough, they start moving, and Miami was fantastic. Everybody was happy. Miami continued being open, the beach, and it was all the time a much easier life, right? And they say, okay, it's fantastic. People are going to move here, and then all these startups are going to be in Miami. And what happened at the end is that didn't happen. The people came back, but Miami benefited because now it's starting to create its own ecosystem because it learned from that, right? And it started connecting all these people. So at the end, both of them got connected, and they grew. Both of them grew. So what we are seeing is there is a potential advantage of this temporary migration, if you want, because then these VCs and these startup founders decided to, oh no, that's a good deal. I have a second home there, but my first home will be in New York, and that's probably something that you can also see here in Japan, right? So my business and where I really need the global connection is in New York or in Tokyo in that case, but I have a second home that has to be also big enough for me to connect with people or be active. But it doesn't have to be as powerful as the first one. It's more livable. So that's also another dynamic that we have seen.
I see. What about migration because of the heat, actually? I think the city of Miami was the first one to appoint chief heat wave officer or something like that. So away from the topic of the pandemic, the climate crisis is another reason for the relocation, right? How do you see the trend from the climate change?
Yeah, so I haven't seen migration yet because of that in a significant data way, right? So we could see, but obviously the news that we are seeing, that there seems to be some extreme effects, right? With the fires in California, for instance, or the hurricanes intensifying in the Caribbean region. And that's the US, right? But also in Europe, I mean, we have different storms coming. Here, I guess you probably have more typhoons, or something will happen, right? But we haven't seen any migration. What we have seen is impact in cities because of the raise level of the oceans, for instance, and also the impact of urbanization plus the changes in climate. So, for instance, Jakarta is one of the cities that have more challenges with that because it's sinking. It's basically sinking, and the question is, what do you do with that? What we saw in Miami, is it because of the strip of land that they have there, plus the hurricanes, or the construction, or a mix of both, or because they don't have the codes you have for construction? That's probably all of the above, right? So I think for something like climate change, Japan is probably more prepared than other countries because of the experience you have with disaster risk management in general. I think you are obviously one of the best prepared countries in the world for everything. I remember one of my first projects at the bank, I was working with Vietnam, and we came to Japan to learn about disaster risk management. So we went to all the facilities you have about disasters. We went to the volcano center, we went to the earthquake center, we went to the flooding center, where you have all the rivers of Tokyo and the management control. And I remember that I brought the Vietnamese counterparts, but we also did a little symposium with many other governments. And I remember speaking with the Chilean minister, and he was telling me, like, I want to take everything. I want to take everything to my country. This is perfect. I want to take everything. The problem is, it's too much costly. I don't have so much money to put sensors everywhere. But the point is, I think you've done your homework to prepare for everything better than others. And I think that's something that many countries don't have. And that's what you were starting to see the impact. I don't know what would be the impact in the dynamics of the cities. Obviously, there will be changes, and we are seeing this move into more greener and more nature solution measures. Like for instance, one of the things, you probably know that, but New York did after the storms, the Sandy storm and all these storms, where they realized, okay, we need a barrier around Manhattan, especially downtown area, to prevent these kinds of storms, right? Because they can be really devastating. And the thing with climate change, I think one of the things we have seen is it's not that it's happening constantly, it just happens at peaks, but the peaks are higher, right? So you have these storms that you are not prepared for because the level is not like raising up normally, but suddenly when the storm comes, it raises much more than it used to. So the city was not prepared for that, and then they have a huge disruption. So they started to look into how do we build the barriers across it, and the ideas that they started to have is, can we do barriers that don't look like a wall, right? And that they get integrated into the urban landscape. Now, what we are seeing now in London is taking this concept a little bit beyond just the urban landscape and making it more harmonic and creating like parks around it, which is something that Japan also does with the flooding areas, right? You convert it into parks, and then you use them when there is no flooding, and then you don't use them. So the same thing was integrated in the urban landscape was what New York was looking into, and regain that space for the citizens and the city. What we are seeing now in London is taking that a step ahead and going into converting into a natural landscape with natural solutions, and bringing the nature that was there before, the plants that were there before, to establish the roots that they need to serve as a natural barrier, and recreating that natural barrier. So if you take that idea extrapolate to New York, it would be like, can you create like a wetland with vegetation around the city, so it stops the flooding before it even arrives to the city? Of course, that may not work in New York, but just is the concept. The concept is, can you recreate the natural based solutions to leverage them, and instead of trying to engineer how will be the response of the flooding or the natural resource, you just use the nature that already knows how to do it somehow, right? So I think that's what we are seeing more and more, and more thinking about that. adapting the city to the nature instead of the reverse, right?
Yes, yeah, right. So, overall message that included in your, pages after pages of the presentation was that we are going back to more natural way of life, right? So you said naturally back to nature, something like that. You're right. So don't engineer to go back to something natural, but be natural to be back into natural state of life, something like that, right? And it was interesting, so Japan has been under a strong influence of the United States after the Second World War, right? Urbanization, industrialization, education, whatnot. We followed the way America led the world. Maybe Spain too, right? So the modernization is one of the major example. The Japan is known for car manufacturing. That's gonna occurred because of the influence of the United States. Okay, you need to be rich and drive a big car, eat a steak every day, drink beer, matcha, or whatever. But after the party, now we recognize that that's not sustainable, right? Going back to what we used to be, you said the village-like living environment, which is exactly right. That's the kind of story we heard when we were children, right? Before you go into the bed and sleep, mommy told me a fairy tale or the old story about the villages. That's the kind of story we need to remember again, right? And the good news is that the technology is leveraging us to actually implement that kind of idea. You don't need to use whole, natural resources to destroy the nature. It's easier right now. And you said the walkability. What else you mentioned? Small green areas in Japan, Tokyo, mindfulness. So messages slow down. Right? Messages slow down. Don't accelerate yourself to don't to be industrial too much. Take your time and slow down. Was that right?
Well, I think that's what we have learned after the pandemic, when people had a lot of time to think, as I said, and some time to suffer. The ideas that are coming afterwards was like, hold on, we have been doing this. This is not right. We are craving this other thing. Why don't we have it, right? So I think, and that has come from many different sources. And what's interesting to me is that it's universal. It doesn't matter the region is coming in the same wave length. So it's very telling. And what you were saying before about the influence of the US in Japan, I think it's true, because after the war, right? So you have this big influence, and for me, Japan is fascinated in the sense that you had to almost rebuild the country, right? Because of the unfortunate effects of the war, with the mix of the construction in Japan being paper and wood, and the incendiary bombs. So you basically had everything to rebuild, which didn't happen in Europe. In Europe, you have some cities that had a big rebuilding, but the structures remain, right? So that was very, very different. And I think that's where you're starting to have these motorways and these highways. Of course, after the Olympics, you had many of those rapid development. But what is interesting to me is that Japan is closer to Europe in the traditional way. Your cities are more like walkable, the traditional ones. I mean, if you go to Kyoto, which is one of the few that preserve as it was, it's more walkable. It's more like a European city if you think like that. I mean, the neighborhoods, right? So your tradition seems to be closer to these European cities and this concept. Americans is different. Americans started to build them when the horses were there already, right? So they started thinking in a different perspective, and they had so much space, and it was so easy. In Japan, space is precious, and it's different. So for me, it's interesting because you have this kind of tension going on all the time between too much highways, too much cars, and then I want to do the compact city. I want to have this human scale. So it's just very interesting, and I wonder why the connection with Europe cities in terms of urban planning is not stronger sometimes.
Good point. So, you're right. We had a chance of the scrap and build after the Second World War. And today, I think Japan is more closer to European, cities. We are not, building everything from scratch anymore. Rather, in your term, flexible, adaptive, and reuse, right? So don't scrap it, but think about how you redefine what's already existed, and be wise to use what you already have in your hand, right? So that's something I learned from actually Barcelona. Talking to guys in Barcelona, they're talking about, okay, don't destroy it. Rather think differently. You have something already precious in hand, and make it used for your life, and that's wiser actually. And looking around, my town and where I live, yeah, right. So, population is decreasing, and the economy is deflationary. And then Big Bang is not a case any longer.
Yeah.
How can you, in your term again, make the city more human scale, greener, so that you don't need to, spend too much money to enjoy yourself, but more natural life, more relaxed life, more comfortable life with family and your friends and everything. That's the kind of story attracting Japanese people right now.
I think that's what we all want at the end. So that's the reason you're seeing this drive, but it's difficult to achieve, right? Once we start building the big cities. But in Japan, for me, at least my time being here, one of the things that was more interesting to me is, again, this tension, right? On the one hand, it's very quickly in Tokyo to take down buildings, even historical buildings, and create a new one. And you do that constantly, and that's very similar to American cities. It's all the time building new buildings, and the developers are super fast, and everything is new, in part because of the earthquake-related technology, so you want to get the new ones, but in part also the market dynamics. But on the other hand, for instance, in the residential areas, you know how to share very well the public space, right? And to use it for many things. And for instance, Japan is probably one of the countries that use the bicycle the most. We always talk about Denmark, but oh my God, if you see here, everybody is using the bicycle. I'm always amazed with the mothers with the 2 children and doing everything, going to the school, doing the groceries. Basically, you have the multimodality of transportation. Then they go to the station, they put it in the bicycle parking, and then they go somewhere else. And the use of these smaller streets, I see cars, I see bicycles, I see pedestrians, and it's a very small street, but you can use everything. So I think that's something that is very unique here, and something you should be very proud, because it's super smart, and other cities still want to learn about it. And yeah, sometimes you don't think about it, but you have it. You have many of those shared uses that you do very intelligently in a natural way.
It's an interesting way of characterizing Japan. Yeah, we've been aggressively using bicycle. When I was a high school student, I was riding a bicycle to the school. That's everyone is doing it. And mamachari is right. Mothers are carrying, kids on both sides of the back and the front of the bicycle to carry and go shopping.
You're more advanced than Copenhagen or Amsterdam, and we always see this as the example of the bicycle city in the world. And I think no, it must be Tokyo.
Well, we didn't see that was that fashionable, but now the world is catching up with us and say bicycle. Well, we have been doing it already.
Exactly.
Yeah. And another point I will ask you is the last question, and then I will move on to the question from the audiences. You talked about kind of a positive cycle. Once you achieve higher quality of life, and then people seeking higher quality of life will come in, and there's a kind of positive spiral, right? And I think every city in the world has potential to do that. But from your perspective, which city in the world is most prominent in terms of creating such kind of positive spiral?
Yeah, that's it's a difficult question because there are many, right? So it's not like one.
It doesn't need to be one, but maybe some cities.
Yeah, and with the pandemic, it's difficult because it also depends on how it has been hit. But Barcelona was one of them. That Barcelona you mentioned, right? So it achieved that. Now let's see how they came out of the pandemic. But it was one of them. But for me, it's more interesting to look at the ones that they were struggling being a factory city, right? Like it was like a place that was losing people, like it was all manufacturing. And I start thinking like cities like Pittsburgh, how they're reinventing themselves. And when you look at them, they did it two ways. First, they did a lot of adaptive reuse of the factories and transforming them in public space, green spaces. We try to rebuild them. And then they changed also the economy into service and start going more into technology, leveraging also universities, but attracting talent. And in that case of Pittsburgh was through the university. And through the university, they said then, okay, we're gonna start financing the business that come out of that, become entrepreneurs and stay in Pittsburgh. And then they started developing an environment that will attract this kind of young people that were more related to technology and entrepreneurship. And that included also developing these alternative kind of areas. Then the hipster movement came, so they enabled that, and then you start attracting more and more of that talent. And that's an interesting case of how to do it. Of course, there are many examples similar that we can see, but for me, those are ways that I've seen that signifies this cycle, right? Because it was at the same time creating these new green spaces, but attracting this talent and seeing how this talent needed more green spaces or more communal spaces or more areas where there was flexibility in the kinds of use of the street, terraces, cafes, and things like that. And letting them reuse industrial old buildings and do adaptive reuse with better zoning, flexibility of licenses to do their business. And if they wanted to do in a old factory area, just to bring the food trucks and start there using that during the weekends, let them do it, let do the festival, etc. Right? So it was kind of this realization of how do we attract more of these people, and at the same time enabling them to start developing their own ecosystem of social life and the livability together, right? And that attracted the economic incentives because there were more businesses, so more investment, and so attracting more of these people that started saying, "Oh, okay, we're going to transform more buildings into making them better," right? And at the neighborhood level, that's a little bit what happened in Brooklyn too, the transformation of that area. And cities, well, you start seeing that, right? When you start looking into quality of life, then it's easier for you to attract talent. So even if you become expensive, think about Singapore, right? Singapore, all the time, despite of being a very expensive city, it's very careful into trying to always have some quality of life, right? And be sure that pollution is low, that is the green city or everything around it, because that's the only way of maintaining your competitiveness. If you become more and more expensive, you need to provide more value for people to come to you, right? And I think so it's a never-ending story. Let's put it that way. so very, very difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is, the typical cities like Copenhagen, Singapore, Helsinki, those are top-notch cities, you can always remember. But, as you mentioned, factory cities have a very high potentiality as well. Not exactly center of the city, center of the Tokyo, like a little bit away from the center of the Tokyo, like Ottawa, some part of the Osaka, which used to be a center of the manufacturing, which is now a little bit vacant, and the rent and the land price is a little bit lower. And there are lots of space for doing something new. The people who like the craftings, like a Fab Lab, those kind of people coming together, trying to do something creative with more space and more free atmosphere. And the college professors are interested in collaborating with those people. So this is going to be an interesting story we will see in the future. Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think in Japan, probably Fukuoka is the city that has done it the best in that sense.
I see.
Because they have, I mean, it has been driven by the leadership of the city and the mayor, but kind of on a consensus, right? It continues. It doesn't matter which mayor you have, it will go in that direction. And their continuous focus is quality of life, right? And advancing that. And then after that, they say, okay, we're going to focus on the startups because that's what the young people wants to do, right? So it continues going into that direction. So you start to see the cycle that is happening in Fukuoka. And when you see the statistics, it's the only city, well, one of the, if not the only, one of the few that the population is growing. It's not decreasing, right? So I think, yes, Fukuoka had the conditions of the climate maybe and next to the sea and everything, but they also did it very well, right? So it goes into both.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the questions, comments from the audiences. We have a few. First one from Kumaresh Misra-san. What regulatory changes would be needed to allow this flexibility in usage of existing assets in cities?
Oh, right. That's a difficult question to answer because it depends on the city.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because cities have different regulations. So it really depends on the city. Sometimes it's, well, I mean, basically, usually the city has the authority to change that, but sometimes it doesn't depend on the street. Some of them are under the Ministry of Transportation Authority, for instance, so it would be more difficult to do. Then you have the servitudes of passage, right? So you have to abide by them. So it depends on the legal use. So I'll give you just a couple of examples when, for instance, in Madrid, they closed all the downtown area to traffic. They decided we're going to shut down all this area to traffic, and the zone area was taken to court, and they lost for constitutional right laws, and they needed to redo all the regulations. So the point is, first, it depends on each country and its city. And then even on that, you have some constitutional issues that you need to be sure that you can do. But in many cities, can be under the authority of the city or of the KU in this case, or the regional government. And especially when it's flexible use, it's easy to do. So for instance, the weekends, like here, you close in Ginza most of the streets to pedestrian use, right? So that's easy to do. In Bogota, they close half of the street just for cycling on the Sundays, right? And they allow cycling go around it. So usually that's allowed during times. It's the same as when you close a street for a marathon or an event, right? So that's usually very normal. But when you do it for longer periods of time, normally the city just need to change the ordinance or the urban planning or whatever rule is about the use of that. But it depends on the street and the land property and which jurisdiction it is. So for instance, in the US, in Washington City, it's another city where I live, there are parts of the city that are under federal jurisdiction because they are natural parks or is the federal government, right? So the city cannot close those ones. It would need the federal authority. So that's where it becomes a little bit tricky. But otherwise, if it is part of the city, it's easy. It's just the city government is on a resolution or an ordinance to change that.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is from Kono-san. Thank you for interesting observations. As an investment body, I wonder how World Bank uses its institutional tools, such as systems and investment programs, to make the city into the direction you expected. And then continues. As you mentioned, the pandemic accelerated trends which existed before the COVID-19. When paradigms change, emerging economies leapfrog the industrialized countries, like the penetration of mobile phones. While you showed scenes from industrialized countries in your presentation, I wonder how World Bank works for the emerging economies, which are World Bank's major clients, in order to assist them to transform themselves into the new paradigm of the livable cities, I suppose you have to convince the central government at the first place.
It's a long one. So, I mean, again, it depends on the central government, on the jurisdiction of each country. So, for instance, in Chile, yes, the central government has authority almost everything. The cities, practically, they don't exist as themselves. It's only neighborhood level. So the ministries have authority in the transportation even of each city. So it's kind of a different jurisdiction. In a country like Colombia, the cities have autonomy, right? So it would depend on each country how that works. So I would defer for each country legislation in that regard. But in terms of the emerging economies, the trends that we have seen that I talk about happens in both, in developed and developing countries. It's in general, the pictures we just took the ones that were permission free to share. So then is the limitation of the internet sometimes that doesn't allow us to have the pictures from everywhere. But those kind of trends comes from both directions. And one of the things we've seen with developing countries or emerging economies is exactly what this question is saying. Is sometimes they leapfrog, sometimes it goes faster. So, for instance, that was even before the pandemic. I mean, Kenya is a country where all payments has one of the highest digital payments rate in the world, and it's mobile payments. It's actually much higher than Japan, but by a huge difference. So in that regard, you have opportunities that these countries can take because they don't have legacy systems, because they don't have a banking industry like Japan. They don't need to fight against the banking industry to make those regulatory changes. There are no lobbies. There's much less transaction and friction in those changes to be adopted. And that's something that at the bank, we always try to see what is the trend and can we take advantage of that for the development goal we are looking together with our partner country or partner city, in that case, to develop. And in those cases, that is an advantage that they have because there are less legacy usage. You don't get something that happens many times in developed countries, which is this technology lockdown or this now physical infrastructure lockdown, because you design one way and it's physical, it's very difficult to change. And a little bit what you were mentioning, Barcelona is trying to say, because we have this physical lockdown, how do we think differently and imaginatively to reuse it, right? But that's it because of that limitation. But when you don't have that, the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want, right? So I think that is the advantage that many emerging economies have, and many cities in emerging economies have, especially for these new possibilities of technologies, right? So that's what we see. And what we do is at the bank, as I said, we provide funding with loans where develop policy programs together with the counterparts of the government, and we design the projects to achieve the development goal with the best available solutions. And the role of TDLC and my role here is to try to find those solutions so then we can apply it to projects. So all you saw is just this part of learning about what is out there that can be leveraged to achieve the goals of our client countries we can serve afterwards. So that's a little bit the answer to that question.
Thank you. Yeah, as you mentioned, the legacy typical in the industrialized country is big constraints. You know, I am the member of the Japanese government regulatory reform promotion council, and we worked hard to ban the stamping on paper. It's a legacy culture, right? Yeah, with that custom in place, you cannot eliminate paper from the office at all. Then there's no point to talk about digitalization, right? So eliminating the practice of stamping on paper first, and if you don't have that kind of practice in place, you can just digitalize, right? And you can see many countries surrounding Japan leapfrogging in digitalizations. Korea to some extent, Singapore to some extent, some other countries extent. So it's a little bit of a game-changing moment right now. All right, and so Victor, last question from Ardianti Yanni. Hello, Victor. Thank you for your presentation. From your perspective, how do you see the continuity of people's appreciation for green spaces now that COVID-19 restrictions are starting to get lifted and people returning to their routine pre-pandemic? How can we keep this interest so that more public parks can be provided and also to be encouraged to walk and bike, especially from government side? Thank you. This is an interesting question.
Yeah. So I think the interest is not gonna stop. It's just that we become more busy, right? Busier, and then we have to go back to our routine to go to work and so on and so forth. But I think that need of parks will stay there, especially as soon as you have the free time, right? That you don't have to go to the office or things like that. So I think that will continue. Now, the question here, I think it's more about how do we keep the political momentum and the incentive for doing these changes, right? It's more like that when we were focused because it was such a difficult moment for everyone that we wanted that, but it's not easy to get there, right? As a city, as a policymaker, things take time. They have a lot of friction in doing it. You have to do changes. As we were saying, just transforming an area into a park, it's difficult. They have owners with rights of land. They have different interests going around. So of course, how do you keep the momentum and how do you keep moving it through it? And the same goes, I think, about the walkability and bicycles. So what we are seeing, cities like Milan or cities like Barcelona, or cities even like Amsterdam or Paris, the reason I think the mayors were launching these new ideas or new initiatives was not to lose that momentum. And we've seen that also in some cities in Latin America doing very similar things and saying like, let's go now, it's the moment to push more into that because you have the political buy-in and started putting those ideas and start moving people towards that even before we get out of the pandemic. But I mean, for good or for bad, I'm not a politician, so I don't have to deal with this very complicated problem. And I'm gonna defer on them to do it. What we try to do from our side is to help cities to get the best solutions and give them the resources to do it with knowledge and with financing, and we will continue to do that. But in this case, is how do you maintain the incentives, I think, and how do you continue providing those incentives to have the momentum and the constituency to do the changes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a interesting time in the moment, right? So we started to walk into the long tunnel, which is dark inside, don't know which way to go, and keep walking into the center of the tunnel. We discovered, oh, light is ahead of us. That's the walkability bike and everything, right? And then we started to vaccination. The people want to say, well, let's go back. No, let's go ahead. So the forces are moving towards the opposite end right now. So you see how the balances came out. Interesting discussion right now. Yeah. All right. So Victor, now we are coming out of the time right now, and we really enjoyed the discussion with you, and it was very educational, informative, and useful. And thank you for spending your Friday night with us. That's much appreciation.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Tak. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. This concludes our webinar today. Thank you, Victor, again, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
All right, Kudo-san.
Yes. So Victor, thank you very much for having a great presentation, and we really enjoyed it. And for all those viewed until the end, thank you for viewing this webinar. And before we conclude, I'd like to just quickly go through our Smart City Institute Japan webinar. So thank you for viewing today, and After this event, you would have received a questionnaire, so we would appreciate your answers to the questionnaires. And also the programs or the webinars will be available on SNSs such as Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn of Smart City Institute Japan. And also the information are posted on Smart City Institute Japan's website and the PTX. And the past videos, including today, can be viewed on Smart City Institute Japan's YouTube channel. And for our future programs, above, this is today. And also next Tuesday, we will have a second series of Eden Strategy Institute in Singapore. And also after that, towards the end of this month, July 26th, we will have a Smart City from Philippines. Ms. Chris Lubiano will be presenting. And our Smart City Institute of Japan, we have been established back in 2019, 2 years ago. And the number of membership is growing, and it is up close to 430 now, including full membership of 79 and supporting member of 340, including local governments, 191. And for our membership, our global partner organizations are increasing as well, including from London, Greater London Authority, British Embassy, Tokyo, Connected Places Catapult, as well as many organizations in Asia as well. So thank you very much for staying with us, and please have a nice weekend. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.